One of today's audio clips is used by the United States Navy to simulate torture for Navy SEAL trainees. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please steal the Like Button's library card and then take out several hardcover coffee table books, but then never return them. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. Amongst all the special operations units in the entire world, there are a handful of units that are better than everybody else. And one of them is the United States Navy SEALs. Now, I'm a little bit biased because I was a Navy SEAL from 2012 to 2017, but just objectively speaking, the amount of money that the United States Navy invests into creating one Navy SEAL is approximately $1 million. Now think about that from a military standpoint. The military is like the ultimate bureaucracy, where it's all about kind of mass producing solutions. But with the Navy SEAL teams, it's kind of like the opposite, where this big bureaucracy is spending all this money and time to identify individuals that on their own merits are going to be the solution. And in order to be identified as one of those individuals, you need to go through arguably one of the most difficult military selection programs in the entire world. And if you make it to the very end of the 1.5 to 2 year long process of becoming a Navy SEAL, one of the last things you have to do before you can actually put a trident on your chest and be a Navy SEAL is go through a course called SERE School. SERE stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. They're gonna teach you how to handle being captured by the enemy, and more specifically, being tortured by the enemy. Much of SERE School is done in the classroom, but the famous part of SERE School is done in the field. Now, before I get into anything to do with the field exercise, just know that I can't really talk in detail about it because a lot of it is actually sensitive information. So I'm going to be speaking in generalities about the course, but you'll get the gist and you will appreciate the audio recording. After you finish the classroom portion of SERE School, you move on to the kind of final training exercise or field exercise. And that's where they simulate you being behind enemy lines and getting captured, and you need to basically show your instructors that you don't just crumble, that you actually can handle the stress and the pressure and the mistreatment. There are segments of the field training exercise where you are put into very stressful positions, you're sensory deprived, and you have to listen to a particular audio recording. It is the Boots poem by Rudyard Kipling, and anybody that's been through Navy SEAL School knows exactly what that poem sounds like, because you listen to it over and over and over and over and over. It is maddening. I mean, maddening. I put it on for this video and listened to it. I had to turn it off. It's seriously awful. And so just imagine listening to this for like, I don't want to give any times away, but it's an extremely long amount of time that you're just listening to this in this tight little space and you're all cramped up. It's awful. It really is. So here you go. Have a listen to the official torture song of the Navy SEAL teams.
We have put logging over Africa. So stand by day because the company, but night brings long strings of 40,000 million boom, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Try to think of something different. Oh my God, keep me from going lunatic. Boom, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. We have put logging over Africa.
In 2013, a Reddit user was having a hard time getting to sleep, and then they would wake up in the middle of the night and their sleep was just generally broken, and so they decided they would look into downloading a sleep app. She wound up settling on a particular app called Sleep as Android because not only would it give her a whole bunch of information about her night's sleep, but it also had a constant recording going over the course of the night, and anytime it picked up an anomaly in sound, like snoring or talking in your sleep, it would record it and then clip it and provide it to you the next morning and show you these highlights of your sleeping from the night before. So she downloads the app, and starting on October 1st, 2013, she begins dutifully turning this thing on before she goes to bed, and then the next day she would get up, she'd review her sleep, she'd read all the graphs, she'd get all the reports. But the thing she wound up being the most interested in was this little timeline of all these instances where she would snore or make a funny sound. And it was just interesting because you don't get to listen to yourself sleep because, well, you're sleeping. But starting in November, so a month after downloading it, she started noticing that the app was picking up this strange clicking sound. It didn't have a consistent cadence to it. It almost sounded like someone had dropped something on the ground, but it was really difficult to discern it as something specific in the room. And so she assumed it had to be like the string on the fan, because some nights her fan was on, some nights it was off. And when it was swinging, maybe it was rattling the fan and the chain was bumping into the side of the frame, or it was just something else in her room. It didn't strike her as a very meaningful sound, but she was at least starting to be aware of this sound. Over the next couple of weeks, she heard the sound a couple more times, not while she was sleeping, just the next morning when she would see it on her app. And she actually started trying to recreate the sound by turning on the fan and actually shaking the fan to try to get the string to bounce up against the side in hopes that that would be the sound. But despite listening really intently for this sound, she just could not duplicate it and just didn't know where it was coming from. But again, she's not concerned, she's just a little bit perplexed. Then on December 30th, 2013, so this is about 3 months after downloading it, she's had about a month and a half of hearing these clicking sounds. She wakes up and she sees on her app's timeline there's a whole bunch of audio recordings, but there's one particularly loud recording that took place at 2:04 a.m. earlier that morning. She loads it up and she starts hearing those clicking sounds that she had grown accustomed to hearing, but then she hears herself sit up in the bed and say, "What are you doing?" And then there's a pause, and then a male voice says back to her,
"Nothing."
And then you hear some more clicking, and you hear that same voice say,
"That's them."
And so right after hearing this recording, the Reddit user is like, "Oh my God, was someone in my house?" And she runs around the house, makes sure nobody else is there. All the doors are locked, all the windows are locked. There's no sign that anybody was in the house. Nothing's missing, at least nothing she can tell. The Reddit user's friend suggested, why don't you post it to Reddit and see if anybody can give you some insight into what this was. Out of the thousands of comments on there that were all over the map for what this could be, there was a speech expert that actually got in touch with the Reddit user and went through the audio with her and then had her send recordings to him as well as her son to try to see if it would be possible for her to make the voice. And the speech expert determined that it would be impossible for her or her son to have made the voice in the room, meaning someone else was in the room with her in the middle of the night. After this particular night, she never picked up another voice in her room with her, but she did continue to hear that clicking sound that she began to associate with whoever this person was that was in the room with her, and so she and her son ultimately moved. Here is the audio recording.
What are you doing? Oh. Okay.
In the late 1940s and 1950s, Reverend Jim Jones was known for his charitable works and his efforts towards desegregating Indiana. This earned him a devoted, loyal following, in particular from the African American community. In 1956, he purchased a church in Indiana and he named it the People's Temple, and all of his loyal followers went there and joined his congregation. During his fiery sermons, Jones emphasized helping the poor and lifting up the downtrodden, but despite his best efforts, raising money was proving to be a big challenge for him. Jones knew he was an amazing performer and he was really good on stage, and so instead of trying to do all the old school church fundraising techniques, he decided to do something a little more new school that played to his strengths, which was performance. And so what he started doing is advertising that he could perform miracles, live miracles on stage. And specifically what he said he could do is he could pull cancer out of people. And he had this magic trick where he would go up to somebody that had cancer and he would appear to be pulling on them, and then he would pull out what looked like meat from this person. And it was meat, it was chicken meat. and he made it seem like he had removed the cancer, and people loved it, and his congregation swelled immediately, and money was pouring in. And it was around this time that Jones began to realize the power of his own influence. He could make his followers believe anything he wanted. This power trip, though, over time would cause Jones to lose his grip on reality. And so when he began espousing fairly radical views, he didn't have anybody that was going to stand up and say, I don't know if you're right about that. Instead, he had a mass of people that basically blindly agreed with him. But when his social goals became so radical that they attracted Marxist leaders and violent leftist groups to the People's Temple, it was the one time that his followers said, okay, enough is enough. And there was a mass defection out of the People's Temple. And some of these defectors, when they left and had a chance to kind of look at the People's Temple for what it was, they realized it was more like a cult, and that they had been brainwashed, and that Jim Jones was a lunatic, and anybody who followed him could potentially be in danger. And so they went to the media and told them about this. The media converges on the People's Temple, and all of a sudden it's this huge scandal that Jim Jones is the leader of a cult. And as stories started to break about Jim Jones being this awful person who was stealing from his members and abusing them and brainwashing them, he up and leaves for South America with hundreds of his most loyal followers, and they resettle in an area called Guyana that would eventually be called Jonestown. Life on the Jonestown compound was very grim. Not only did they have 10-hour workdays every day of the week, but food and water were extremely limited because they were so cut off from modern society that the only way they could get any sort of resources was through haggling over a shortwave radio that usually didn't even work. So they're totally cut off, they have very few supplies, and then at the end of their 10-hour workday, it was mandatory for all members to come into this main area underneath this big scaffolding where Jim Jones would get up on stage and he would rant and rave about various government conspiracies that were going to befall them. He would excoriate defectors and talk about how they needed to round them up and make examples of them. And if you stepped out of line, even just a little bit, you could find yourself locked inside of a coffin or trapped at the bottom of a well as a form of punishment. Jones was already spiraling out of control, but some health issues led him to take a daily, near lethal dose of amphetamines and sedatives that made him a total lunatic. Suddenly, his nighttime speeches just weren't enough, and he began pumping these crazy speeches 24/7 over loudspeakers all over the camp. One defector said the speeches were centered on this idea that back in the United States, the government was systematically rounding up African Americans and sending them to concentration camps. And it was only a matter of time before they came here and took any of the African Americans here into captivity. And since the majority of the People's Temple were of African American descent, this was terrifying. U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan had been keeping close tabs on the People's Temple ever since the news broke about Jim Jones kind of being a hack and a maniac. And when they went to South America, he just felt like no one's really checking in on them, and I'm concerned for the well-being of the people that are there. And so on November 18th, 1978, Ryan, along with 18 other people, flew to Guyana to talk to Jim Jones and to make sure that everything was okay. When he arrived, he was expecting it to be kind of in disrepair and be this chaotic scene, but it wasn't. The camp was maintained, people were well-dressed, polite. It seemed like a happy and healthy community with a few hundred people there. And he actually went to Jim Jones and says, you know, it looks like you got a good thing going here. But Jones, in his totally delusional state, believed Ryan was being sent by the US government to round up the members and to ship them into concentration camps. And so as soon as the congressman left the camp and was headed back to the airport, Jones sent a security team after them, and they shot and killed Leo Ryan along with 4 others. While that massacre is going on, Jones goes over to the middle of the camp where he normally gives his nighttime speeches, and he calls all 900 plus members to the middle of camp to listen to him. He turns on a recording device, he picks up his microphone, and he delivers a speech that would come to be known as the death tape. His famous first line of this speech is, "I've tried my best to give you a good life." And you can hear the crowd erupt with cheers as he says this, and what listeners of this tape can't see is what's being unveiled at the same time. Right next to Jim Jones is this silver cauldron of this sickly purple liquid, and next to it are about 900 cups. The next day, authorities are outside the gate of Jonestown and they're getting ready to head into Jonestown to confront Jim Jones about his connection to the murder of Congressman Ryan and the 4 others. And they're loading their guns, they're getting ready for what's bound to be massive resistance from this crazy cult leader and his followers. And as they're making their way down the road and the camp comes into view, they notice that it's eerily quiet and they don't see anybody moving around. And as they're walking through some of the high grass, someone trips and falls, and they think they've stepped on a log. And when they stand up and look down, they notice that it's a dead person, and they scream out, and then everyone's looking around, and they notice that all over the ground in front of them are hundreds and hundreds of dead bodies. There's more bodies than they can possibly count. The previous night, that purple liquid that was revealed to the crowd after Jim Jones begins his speech was Kool-Aid mixed with cyanide. And over the course of several hours, and it's all recorded on the death tape, he encourages his members to come up and die with dignity and drink the Kool-Aid. However, if you didn't drink the Kool-Aid or didn't want to drink the Kool-Aid, like many of the 300 children, their parents would make them or the armed guards would come over and they would inject them with it. And after everybody's died, Jim Jones doesn't even drink from the Kool-Aid. He ends up shooting himself. I've decided to only include a very small portion of the death tape because so much of it is just, it's heartbreaking, it's distressing, and it should be something that you decide you want to listen to. It should not be thrust upon you.
How very much I've tried my best to give you the good life. It was said by the greatest of prophets from time immemorial, no man takes my life from me, I lay my life down. If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace. We've been so betrayed. We have been so terribly betrayed. Take the portion like they used to take in ancient Greece and step over quietly because we are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive.
So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of these 3 stories, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please steal the Like Button's library card and then take out several hardcover coffee table books, but then don't return them. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's just JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok. My username over there is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mr. Ballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, or YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Today I'm going to share with you 3 progressively more insane stories about people who went to forbidden locations and what happened to them. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please tear out the last chapter in every one of the Like Button's books. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. On February 27, 2015, 18-year-old Dalen Pua was visiting his grandmother on the Hawaiian island of Oahu. Dalen, who was a Hawaiian native himself, didn't spend much time in Oahu with his grandmother, and since he was here, he figured he would do the one thing he had always wanted to do, which was to climb the island's very famous and very illegal Haiku Stairs, or better known as the Stairway to Heaven. These stairs were a very narrow, rusty, not well-maintained 4,000-step staircase that weaved its way up the side of this Hawaiian mountain. It was built during World War II by the United States Navy because they wanted access to the top of this mountain where they had a secret radio station. After the war was over, instead of demolishing the steps, they allowed people to walk up and check out the view. But it was so dangerous and it was not well maintained that they eventually closed it to the public starting in 1987 and literally put a fence up and even put guards out to keep people from going in. But Dalen really wanted to do this. So that morning he tells his grandmother that he's thinking about hopping the fence and making the hike. And his grandmother's like, that's a horrible idea. Not only is it dangerous, but they're going to fine you thousands of dollars if they catch you doing that. Dalen backed down from what he said, and he said, okay, I won't go. And he kind of played it off like, I'm not going to go on this hike. But sure enough, right after breakfast, he slipped out of the house, hopped on a bus, and he made his way over to the base of these stairs. Even though it was totally illegal and he was incriminating himself, he was so excited about going on this hike that he documented the whole trip by posting pictures of it to his social media. And so the first picture begins with him at the base of the stairs, where he posts a picture as he's about to start this hike, and then all morning he's taking pictures along the way up these 4,000 stairs. But then around 11 a.m. that morning, the posting stops abruptly, and he hasn't reached the summit. And you figure, if you're going to do this hike and you're already posting pictures of just the way up, certainly when you get to the summit, you're going to take a whole bunch of pictures and post all of those, because that's the prize at the end of this hike. But for whatever reason, the posting stopped at 11 and he clearly hadn't reached the summit yet. And by that night, when he didn't come home, the family was really concerned and they told police. Police launched this huge search for him. They're looking all over the stairs. They got helicopters out. The Navy gets involved. There's no sign of him. He's just vanished. When they couldn't find him after several days, they had to call the search off, and the assumption was, well, you're doing something dangerous. There's a reason this is off limits. He probably slipped at some point and fell down the mountain. That's why this is off limits. It's not safe. But when people reviewed some of his last photos that he had posted to social media, they noticed something in this picture. This shot looks like he's just taking a picture of the dense forest around the stairs. But if you look more closely, there is a man very clearly crouched down a little ways down the trail that appears to be hiding. And many people believe that that guy was following Dalen and at some point attacked him. That Dalen didn't fall off the mountain, he was abducted or killed. To this day, Dalen has never been found, and that mystery man has never been identified. The most remote island in the world is Bouvet Island. It is an uninhabited 19 square mile chunk of rock and ice situated in the South Atlantic. If you were looking on a map and drew a 1,000 mile radius around Bouvet Island, there would be nothing else in it. There is no land, there is nothing. In fact, the nearest land is 1,100 miles away, and it's Antarctica. That's not permanently inhabited. The nearest permanently inhabited land is South Africa, and that's 1,600 miles away. The island is so far away from anything that in 1979, Israel and South Africa dropped 2 nuclear bombs on it, and nobody noticed. The only reason anybody found out about it is because a US satellite happened to be looking in its direction, and it saw 2 bright flashes of light, and they were like, I wonder what that is, and then it turned out to be nuclear testing. For the very few people that have gone to Bouvet Island, you can't just take a ship there or a boat there, because all around the edges of this island are these jagged ice cliffs, and then the water is treacherous down near the edge of these cliffs with very strong currents. If you were to fall in, you'd get sucked up and probably underneath some of these rocks, and then you're done for. So nearly anyone who's stepped foot on Bouvet Island has taken a helicopter and flown the long, sketchy flight, hoping you don't hit a storm because you can't land anywhere. You're in the middle of nowhere with no land, all the way to Bouvet Island. And then anyone that's been on Bouvet Island only stays for like a few minutes because they're so worried about a storm rolling in. And the weather at Bouvet Island is famously bad, and storms are constantly rolling in. Oh, and Bouvet Island is an active volcano. So it's this horrible place that nobody goes to or should go to. But a few people still do. In 1964, British explorer Alan Crawford was sent out to Bouvet Island with a team of scientists to inspect the northwest corner of the island where a recent lava flow had created a shelf that looked like you could potentially build a building on it. And the British wanted to stand up a weather station out there, but they needed someone to go out there and give the green light. So on April 2nd, 1964, Crawford and his crew departed South Africa and began the long helicopter ride. When they finally touched down on Bouvet Island, everybody was on edge because you are in the most remote place in the world, and if anything happens to you, there's no help coming for you. So people were eager to get the work done, survey the area, and get right back on the helicopter and leave. So the team immediately gets to work surveying the site, while Crawford decides to just for a couple minutes to step over the ridge and just look out at the island. He was fascinated with Bouvet Island, and he just wanted to get a better look at it. So he walks up this embankment and he crests the hill and he looks down, and there's this little rocky alcove that he can see the water. It's in this one area of the island where there's a little bit of a beach. And he sees a wooden lifeboat that's kind of half sunken sitting in the shallow waters of this lagoon. He couldn't believe it because he knows it's not theirs because they came in on helicopter. And he's also thinking, like, how could this boat have gotten here at all? The nearest land is 1,100 miles away. So he starts walking down towards the boat, and he sees on the beach 2 wooden oars that he assumes go with the boat. Next to them is a flattened copper tank that's used to catch water, and then next to that was a wooden barrel, which also would have been used to store water. He starts looking around the beach for other signs of human life, and there are none. There's no tent, there's no clothes, there's no human remains. He finally gets down to the beach and actually wades out the little ways into the water to actually inspect this lifeboat, and he starts looking for identifying marks or numbers on the boat that might give away where it's from, but there's no significant marking on the boat. It was in pretty good shape, but there was just nothing to give away where it was from. Because Crawford knew they had very little time before they were going to leave the island, he ran back on shore and he looked around on the beach some more. He walked up the hill a ways to get a look down the island to see if there's any sign of human life on this island, but there's none. And so he goes back over to his team and he tells them what he's found. But his team is so focused on getting this survey done and getting the heck out of here that they don't really care about this lifeboat. And they say, you know what, it probably washed up from some shipwreck or something. There's probably some explanation for it. Let's just get this done and get out of here. Crawford feels a little bit frustrated because he's fascinated by what he's just found and he wishes they were too. So he just walks back over the hill and he takes his camera out and he takes a picture of the lifeboat. After that, he hopped in the helicopter, flew back to South Africa, and he showed this picture to his superiors, and he was hoping they would launch some sort of investigation to see who was out there. But much like his team, who didn't care when they were already at Bouvet Island, his superiors, who were thousands of miles away from Bouvet Island, just didn't care very much about some random lifeboat on some random island in the middle of nowhere. But 2 years after Crawford's expedition, another crew was sent out to Bouvet Island to survey the lagoon where this lifeboat was found, and the crew would report that they found the lagoon, but there was no boat, there was no barrel, there was no copper tank, there was no oars, there was nothing. It was as if it was never there. So while we don't know how the boat got there or how it left, or who was on the boat and where they went, what we do know is at some point, some poor soul or souls were trapped on the most isolated and wretched island in the entire world. In central Texas lies a stunning natural wonder called Jacob's Well. It's this beautiful, clear water spring that every summer when the weather gets really hot in Texas, people converge on Jacob's Well and enjoy swimming in the water. But it's not just for casual swimmers trying to avoid the heat. It's for daredevils that strap scuba gear on and dive down through Jacob's Well through a 10-foot wide shaft that leads to one of the most intricate and dangerous underwater cave systems in the world. Jacob's Well is broken up into 4 chambers. As you move from chamber 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, it gets harder and harder to squeeze through the narrow spaces, and each of the chambers gets smaller and they get darker because you're losing sunlight, and they just become overall much more difficult to navigate the deeper you go. Imagine you put on your scuba gear and you hop into Jacob's Well and you start swimming straight down. Now there's going to be what looks like the floor of the well, and then at the center of it is a 10-foot wide shaft that goes straight down. And if you swim down through that, you're going to reach the first chamber, which sits at about 30 feet and goes all the way down to 55 feet. In that first chamber, the sunlight still hits, so there's algae, there's wildlife, and it's where rookie scuba divers will spend their time in Jacob's Well. At the bottom of the first chamber is another shaft opening, but it's more narrow than the very first one you went through, and that shaft, that tunnel, is actually what makes up the second chamber, and it brings you down all the way to 80 feet. So from 55 feet to 80 feet, you are in the second chamber, and it's basically a tube. Any diver that's going to be in Jacob's Well has to be aware when you are in the second chamber on your ascent to not go down the false chimney. The false chimney is this opening that looks exactly like the main exit out of the second chamber into the first chamber, but it's not. It's a dead end that loops around before you hit a wall, and you got to go all the way back out. So hopefully you have enough air at that point. The second chamber attracts novice scuba divers and intermediate scuba divers. You still have light coming in, but it's definitely more tight, it's more claustrophobic, and because of that false chimney, it's a little bit more hazardous going into the second chamber. If you continue down past the 80-foot mark, which is the bottom of the second chamber, there is a very tight squeeze that you can barely get through with your tanks on that will bring you into a very small room that is the third chamber. At this point, the sunlight is gone, and there's all this silt and loose gravel inside of the third chamber that if your fin so much as knocks it, it will float into the water and then it will blind you. The third chamber is only from 80 feet to 90 feet, so it's only 10 feet of water. Generally speaking, you only see expert divers going into the third chamber. At the bottom of the third chamber is this heavy metal grate that sits over this tiny little opening, and that is the opening to the infamous fourth and final chamber of Jacob's Well. No one can describe what it looks like inside of the fourth chamber because one, as soon as you go in there, it's impossible not to kick up a ton of silt, so you're going in blind. But two, anyone that has attempted to go into the fourth chamber and maybe has been successful has died. There are literally divers that are deceased inside of the fourth chamber. And after about a dozen people died trying to get into that fourth chamber, they finally just sealed it up. But if you were to pry open that gate and go into the fourth chamber, you would have to remove your air tanks, push them into the fourth chamber, and then you'd have to wriggle your way through while keeping the mouthpiece in your mouth into the fourth chamber that, again, we don't even know what's in there. In 1983, 24-year-old college students Richard Patton and Clark McConnell entered Jacob's Well around 8:30 p.m. They were both experienced scuba divers. They were in an advanced scuba diver class with all the certifications for that. They had dove Jacob's Well before, and they wanted to check out the fourth chamber. They got in the water. They went through that initial shaft into the first chamber. They continued into the tunnel that was the second chamber. They wriggled their way into the third chamber, and they reached the gate. Using some equipment they brought with them, they were able to pry open this gate, and Richard Patton was the first one to go into the fourth chamber. He removed his tanks and pushed them inside of this opening, and then he began headfirst to slither inside of this fourth chamber opening while Clark waited. And Clark would later say that as soon as Richard had pushed his way and had actually made it into the fourth chamber, Richard comes screaming up back out of the fourth chamber. And Clark realizes that he doesn't have a mouthpiece in. He doesn't have scuba tanks on. Richard is desperately trying to wriggle his way out on a breath hold because he's dropped his tanks, and he's reaching for Clark to help him get pulled through this hole, and he can barely get out of this hole. And as soon as he gets free, Clark takes his mouthpiece off and he jams it into Richard's mouth. And so they begin buddy breathing. One guy breathes while the other guy holds his breath, and then they reverse that back and forth, back and forth. That's not something you would do on a dive for a long period of time. It's an emergency procedure, and you need to get to the surface as soon as you can. So the pair calms down, they're buddy breathing, and they're making their way back up. They're leaving the equipment that they lost in the fourth chamber, and they're kicking their way up, and they get back into the third chamber. They make their way up into the second chamber. They're kicking it out, and then their heads hit the wall. And they realize they've gone down the false chimney, and what's even worse is they hear that awful ka-tung, which means you have no air in your tanks. Clark, who had taken a full breath before this had happened, he immediately turns and starts swimming and manages to get out of the false chimney and makes it to the surface before he drowns. But Richard wasn't as lucky. His final few moments were spent in total darkness with silt kicked up all around him. He's got no air, he's got no idea where to go, and he's desperately trying to swim up, but he keeps hitting the wall of the false chimney before ultimately drowning. When recovery divers went down to retrieve his body, they found him jammed up at the very end of the false chimney. So that's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I will pin the best comment at the top of the comments section. If you enjoyed today's stories and you haven't done this already, please rip out the last chapter of all the Like Button's books. Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username on both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Every year, hundreds of people go missing under baffling conditions in national parks and forests all across North America. One former police detective named David Paulides has begun investigating thousands of these very strange disappearances, and he outlines his findings in a book series called Missing 411. Today, I'm going to be looking at 3 cases that all fall within the Missing 411 phenomenon, where everybody involved claims to have been chased by someone or something out in the middle of nowhere. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all we do, and we upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please give the like button a gift card to their favorite restaurant, but don't load any money onto it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 1989, 22-year-old Eloise Lindsay was a fresh college graduate, and she was at a crossroads in her life, because even though she just earned her degree, she really didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. And because she was an experienced backpacker, she thought a good way to, kind of get her life together would be to go on a sort of retreat, go out into the woods, go out into nature, and kind of find herself. So she had planned this very detailed 43.3-mile hike along the Appalachian Trail, starting in South Carolina, where the first 7 days of the hike she would be totally on her own, and then at the 7-day mark she would meet up with a friend at a particular rendezvous point. Her friend would give her resupplies and would be her companion for the rest of the hike. When Eloise told her parents what her plans were, they were not concerned for her safety because she was an experienced backpacker. She had made trips like this before. And so they said, great, we'll see you when you get back. So on November 4th, Eloise sets out to begin her journey down the Appalachian Trail. And the first couple of days of her hike were great. The weather was beautiful, the scenery was amazing, and she had all this time to just kind of be by herself and look internal and think hard about what she wanted to do with her life. But on the third day, when she woke up, she was sleeping inside of a tent she had camped just off the trail. She woke up and she had this intense sense of dread. She couldn't really place where it was coming from, but she knew something was wrong, and she's kind of doing inventory of her life, like, what did I forget? Is there something that I'm just not thinking about right now? But she kind of pushes it aside mentally and thinks, okay, you know what? I'm just going to pack up my campsite here and get hiking, and I'm bound to, come up with what it is that's making me feel this way. So she gets out of her tent and she begins packing up her campsite, and she's looking out, kind of scanning the tree line, not because she was looking for anything, but just because she happened to be looking out. And she could have sworn that she saw a man standing, 30, 40 feet away behind a tree. And she kind of did a double take and was staring at him. It's, it's broad daylight, it's the morning, and they're near a trail, so it isn't like unbelievable that there might be someone near her at that very moment. But she kind of did a double take and she looked at them again, and this person was gone. And she stood there for a minute, just kind of looking in the direction of where she had seen this guy, wondering, is my mind playing tricks on me? Did I really see someone there? Why aren't they showing themselves again? If there was someone there, they clearly must have just been looking at me. Why aren't they, poking their heads out again to communicate with me in some way? We're out in the middle of nowhere. We should be talking to each other. But the guy never shows himself again. And so as she's standing there wondering what she should do, she isn't ready to yell out to this person, because there's part of her that's a little bit nervous about yelling out to some stranger in the middle of the woods. But she starts to get this really intense feeling that she's being watched. And it feels an awful lot like the sense of dread she had while she was in the tent. And she's starting to wonder, are my instincts or is my sixth sense picking up that I'm being watched? Like there's some predator out there looking at me right now? And even though she has no way of knowing if that's actually true, she's alone in the middle of the woods. And even though she's experienced, she can't help but feel really vulnerable. And because this guy is just not showing himself again, she feels a little bit threatened. And so she begins to panic and she starts packing up all of her stuff as quickly as she can. And as soon as she can, she takes off down the trail away from that guy she saw in the woods. As she was walking down this trail, she couldn't help but think someone was right behind her. And she kept turning around to see if this person or whoever it was behind her, and no one was ever there. But this visceral feeling that she was being watched, that sense of dread she had, it just was not going away. And so she started walking faster and faster. Before long, she was running, and she's realizing that she's in a section of the Appalachian Trail that's very remote. She's not near civilization. She's not near her next rendezvous point. And so she's thinking to herself, I need to get off this trail. I need to get to a road. I need to get away from here as soon as I possibly can. And so her options were to continue on this trail for several miles, and it would probably take her until well into the night before she was going to reach civilization. Or she could take a shortcut, because she believed there was a road that was running parallel to her trail, but it was way down the mountain. It would require leaving the trail and basically cutting through the wilderness to get down to this road, but she was pretty confident it was right down there. And because this threat of this person or thing following her was so intense for her, she decided to leave the trail. She couldn't stand the idea of having to spend another night out in the middle of the woods with this person stalking her. And so she walks up the trail and starts running down the mountain. It wasn't long before she started to hear audible sounds coming from what she believed to be this person that was following her. And she would turn around and there'd be no one there. And then she started to walk, trying to listen as she's walking, and she would hear footsteps far away from her, and she turned and there'd be nobody there, but she was certain someone was following her, someone was stalking her. And the sounds that were coming out of this person, this animal, whatever it was, they sounded like, a deep male voice, but you couldn't recognize if it was a language of some kind. It just sounded more like a grunt or a yell of some kind. And so her heart rate's elevated, she's panicking, and she's walking as fast as she can just through the middle of the wilderness, hoping she's walking towards this road. But after walking and running for miles into the middle of nowhere, she has not come to a road. It's now completely dark out, and she knows she's lost. And so she has to set up camp in the middle of nowhere, and she knows somewhere out in the middle of the woods is some person or something that is stalking her. All alone, she has no way to contact anyone, she doesn't have a cell phone, it's 1989, and so she sets up her campsite and she gets in her tent, she zips it up, and she lays there hoping she doesn't hear any sounds, and sure enough, within minutes of being inside of that tent, she starts hearing those audible sounds coming from somewhere in the forest, and she hears what sounds like heavy footsteps walking around the perimeter of her campsite. All night long, she hears this, but luckily they don't come up right to her tent. So there's some separation between her and whatever is making these sounds. And then finally, the sun comes up, she is out of that tent, packs it up, and continues running in the direction she hopes is the road. And of course, all day long, she has that sense that someone is watching her. She's hearing footsteps coming from behind her. She would turn, she doesn't see anything. She would hear that audible grunting sound, that low voice coming from somewhere behind her. But again, she would never see whoever it was or whatever it was that was making the sound. And then again, the sun is starting to set and she has not found the road. She hasn't found a trail. And she's thinking to herself, I can't even backtrack because if I turn around and start walking backwards, I'm bound to run into this very thing I'm trying to escape. And so once again, she sets up her campsite in the middle of nowhere. She gets inside, and as soon as she's laying in her tent, she starts hearing those heavy footsteps somewhere out in the woods, kind of walking around the perimeter of her campsite. She's hearing that low audible sound that she can't quite place. And at some point she falls asleep. She gets up the next morning, she jumps out of her tent, packs it up, and starts running, hopefully in the direction that will bring her to civilization. A couple days later, when Eloise was supposed to meet her friend on the trail at the 7-day mark, and they were gonna finish the hike together, well, Eloise doesn't show up. But after several hours, when Eloise did not show up, her friend left the trail and contacted authorities and filed a missing person report. And the police would launch this massive search for Eloise along the stretch of the Appalachian Trail where she had said she would be. And for the next 14 days, hundreds of police and volunteers and helicopters are scouring this area, and there's no sign of Eloise. And so after 14 days from the time her friend filed the missing person report, the police had to turn the search off, and they said, look, we can't find her. 2 days after the search was terminated, so 23 days after Eloise had initially set off for her trek through the Appalachian Trail, a hunter that was out in the middle of nowhere near the Appalachian Trail discovers Eloise perched up against a tree. She's totally emaciated, she's dehydrated, she's delirious, but she's alive. At first, she was terrified of the hunter because she believed the hunter was this person that had been following her. But when she realized he was there to help, she went with him. She was brought back and brought to a hospital, and she was checked out. And besides being dehydrated and, emaciated, she was okay. And she would detail in multiple interviews and in her official statement that she had been chased for the past almost 3 weeks in the middle of the woods, and she doesn't know who it was or why they were chasing her. And then interestingly, she said right before she was found, so a couple of days before this hunter finds her, this person, this thing, whatever it was that was following her, got so close to her a couple different times that she was so scared she ditched her backpack that contained all of her life-saving equipment, like her sleeping bag and her tent, and it had some food and water in there. She ditched that so she could be lighter, so she could run faster away from this thing that is chasing her in the woods. So you gotta figure, you gotta be at such a high level of fear that you're prepared to ditch the one thing you really require to survive out in the wilderness, which was her pack full of supplies. And then after she's ditched her pack and she's run for some distance, she's got no supplies, no food, no water, she stumbles across this tree in the middle of nowhere that wedged inside the trunk is a cache of donuts and pound cake. And so she takes the donuts and pound cake, and between that and the stream water she had found, that's what kept her alive for the last few days before she was found. Eloise says she has no idea what to make of her experience, and law enforcement were baffled by it as well. Some people think Eloise had a mental break, and she effectively made this whole situation up, that she really was lost in the woods, but no one was chasing her, and she was just kind of paranoid and running around the wilderness for a couple of weeks. Other people, including park rangers that work that stretch of the Appalachian Trail, believe it's possible she could have been stalked by wild men, which are basically people that live out in the mountains that are effectively feral, that live off the land, and they've been known, according to local legend, they've been known to attack park rangers, and people that live out in that area have claimed to have seen these wild men, and they kind of match the description of what she was describing. But as of right now, there's no official explanation for what happened to her other than she got lost and was found again. On June 7, 1951, two families from Santa Fe, New Mexico met up at the Santa Fe ski basin to have a picnic together and to enjoy the mountain air. During the summer months when there's no snow on the ground, the Santa Fe ski basin is a very popular location for hikers because the terrain is very rugged, and if you get up to the top of the basin, there's these incredible views overlooking the valley. But on this day, the two families decided they wanted to have a picnic at the base of the basin, basically looking up the mountain. As the parents were setting up the picnic site, the kids started playing together, and that was Larry and Janet McGee, who were brother and sister aged 7 and 5 respectively, and Stephen Cross, who was 3 years old. After they finished setting up their picnic site, they look around and realize the kids are gone. And they're thinking, we just saw them like 2 minutes ago, so they can't have gone very far. And so they start looking around for their kids, and they can't find them. They're yelling out for them, and they're starting to get a little bit more worried, and they start branching out farther and farther, and they realize the only other place they could have gone is up into the woods, which are very steep and very rugged. So they're thinking, well, they can't have gone into the mountains. That would be impossible for these young kids to get very far, and they aren't responding to our calls. It's possible they could have been abducted. And so one of the parents ran down to the main building of the actual ski resort where they kept a staff member in there during the summer months, and they were able to get inside and use a phone, and they called authorities. So the police come out and they set up these huge spotlights that are aimed up at the mountain. And so the idea was, if the kids did get up into the mountain somehow, they would see these lights and hopefully walk down to them. After they set up the spotlights, the police began combing the side of the mountain in hopes that the kids were not abducted. But despite the spotlights and hundreds of searchers and people yelling out for these kids, they never heard back from the kids. They didn't find them. And so all night they're looking for them, and they're realizing that there's a pretty good chance they're probably not here, and that means they probably were abducted. And so by the following afternoon, things were really starting to look grim. There was no sign of these kids anywhere. And that's when a searcher who was way outside of the primary search area, they were about 3.5 miles away, thousands of feet up in elevation. They're up there and they're looking around, and they're getting ready to leave when they see something out of the corner of their eye that looks like a person. They turn around, and one of the kids is poking their head up from behind a log. And the searchers run over to them, and sure enough, the 3 kids were actually inside of this downed log, and they were all okay. As the searchers are picking them up and calling this in, they're thinking to themselves, how in the world did these kids get so far away? Once the children were brought back down to the search headquarters and were reunited with their parents and were checked out by a doctor who said, yep, they're a little dehydrated, but they're okay. After all that was done, the police asked them the question that everybody was thinking: how did you get where you were found? And Larry, the oldest of the group, he was 7 years old. It took him a minute, but eventually he said, they were playing around the picnic area, and they went just barely into the tree line when all of a sudden a bear came out from behind a tree and began chasing them. And the 3 of them ran 3.5 miles up a mountain to find this log, which they jumped inside of, and they hid inside of this log from this bear, which apparently was patrolling the area looking for them. And in addition to this bear that was apparently walking around the area looking for them, Larry said they were especially scared of the gorilla that was walking around the area looking for them as well. Now, it's easy to discount Larry and the kid's story because you could say, okay, well, the gorilla they saw was actually just a searcher looking for them. Except there was no one in that area looking for the kids near that log until right before they were found. It was kind of like a last-ditch effort to push outside the boundaries of the main search area, It was just kind of a miracle they actually located them. And Larry and the kids were saying this gorilla and this bear were looking for them on the first day and first night they were out there. So there were no searchers out there at that time. As for the bear, there have been bear sightings in the Santa Fe ski basin, although it is fairly rare. But if it was a bear that was chasing these kids, it would have caught them. A bear is not gonna not be able to catch 3 small children running uphill. So either there wasn't a bear, or it was some other animal that might have resembled a bear. But what type of an animal would chase 3 small children who are very vulnerable 3.5 miles up a mountain only to abandon them? But even if we say, you know what, there's no way the bear and the gorilla had anything to do with this, this is just kids who got lost and they wound up in the woods and they were found, and that's it. Fine. But I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I can tell you right now, there's no way they could cover a 3.5 mile distance uphill in really rugged mountainous terrain in a 24-hour cycle. There's no way. Without help, that's not possible. I would say the only caveat to that would be if my children were fearful for their lives, in which case adrenaline would kick in and they probably could cover that distance in a 24-hour period. That certainly lends credibility to the idea that Larry, Janet, and Steve were in fact running for their lives, and they had that adrenaline kick, and that's how they were able to cover that distance. But were they really running from a bear or a gorilla? We don't know, and there's been no further investigation into this case, and I think that's because the kids were found alive. The parents, the police, they're happy, and everybody moved on. From 2002 to 2006, Cullen Finnerty was perhaps the most successful college quarterback in history, winning 3 national championships and being named the Division II Player of the Decade. He was also perhaps the toughest college quarterback in history. Most quarterbacks will spend their careers looking to avoid getting smashed by defenders. Not Cullen. Cullen was 6'2", 240 pounds, and he would tell his teammates that he wanted to get hit, and he would hit back. And his coaches hated it about him, but his teammates loved this about him. Cullen was also famous for playing through injuries. His junior year in college, he broke his collarbone, and he didn't tell anyone, and he played through an entire playoff series that he won. After college, Cullen's professional football career was not nearly as successful as his amateur one. He played briefly for 2 NFL football teams, the Baltimore Ravens and the Denver Broncos, but when he wasn't getting any playing time and he just could see the writing on the wall that this was not going to be a match, he was not going to make it in the NFL, he left for Europe to play in a European football league. But when his European football career started to sputter out as well around 2009, he came back to the United States where he joined a very small-time indoor arena football league. And while Cullen's love of football was still there as much as it ever was, he knew at this point, playing at this low of a level, that his career was effectively over. Around the same time that Cullen was hanging up his football cleats, he would meet Jennifer, who would become his wife. She was an all-state volleyball player and in many ways was just as competitive and as athletic as Cullen was. They were kind of like a perfect match for each other. They married in 2010, and Cullen, this big man, big-time quarterback, was shaking and crying at the altar because he was so nervous and excited about marrying Jennifer. Because I think this was a really big turning point for him, where he was basically putting football in the past and starting this new life and building a family with Jennifer, and he was really excited about it. The newlywed couple moved into a house together in Michigan where they had 2 kids, and Cullen landed a good job in medical sales, and by all accounts, Cullen was just hitting his stride post-football. On Memorial Day weekend in 2013, Jennifer's family was planning this 3-day fishing trip along the Baldwin River in Michigan, and the Finnertys decided they would join them. And so Cullen and his wife and kids, they rented a cabin that was going to be near the campsite that Jennifer's family was staying at, and for the entire weekend, it was just this great fishing trip where everybody had a great time and the weather was beautiful. And on May 26th, so the last night of this 3-day fishing trip, Cullen, who had recently purchased this pontoon boat that they had used for this fishing trip, he wanted to just go out one more time on his boat, this boat that he was really proud of, and fish for another 30-45 minutes before ending the weekend. So Cullen put on his waders and his jacket, he grabbed his fishing pole, and he had his family drive him to the stairs that led down to the water where his pontoon boat was. Before he walked down the steps, he turned and told his family that he'd be out for about 30 to 45 minutes and that he wanted to be picked up at the next boat ramp down the way and that he would call when he needed a ride. 42 minutes later at 9:27 p.m., Jennifer receives a phone call from her husband, and she's expecting it to be the call where where he says, okay, I'm ready to get picked up. But when she answers the phone, Cullen is frantic. And he's telling her that he's being followed by two men in the tree line, that he's out on the water on his pontoon, but there are two men in the tree line that he can't see, but he can hear them, and they've been following him for some time. And before Jennifer can even get a word out, Cullen says to her that he's going to beach the boat and take his clothes off, and then he hangs up. Jennifer immediately tries calling Cullen back repeatedly, but he's not picking up, and so she's left feeling totally confused about what her husband has just told her. But what stood out to her was how scared he sounded on the phone. And fear was not something she typically associated with Cullen. This beast of a man, this tough football player, he didn't get scared. So for him to be that scared sounding and to be describing people basically stalking him, she knew he was in serious trouble. So she calls 911 and she describes where he is in the Baldwin River, and the police take her report and say, we'll send someone out right away. After Jennifer got off the phone with police, she called her family and told them about this really strange phone call from Cullen and how she had just called the police and she didn't know what to do. And so her brother tried calling Cullen, and Cullen answered. And when he did, Matt said, hey, Cullen, where are you? And Cullen would say, I don't know where I am, but there's these two guys that are still following me. And Matt would say, are you still on your boat? Are you on land? And all Cullen said is, it's getting pretty rough out here. And then he hung up. Afterwards, Matt would call Jen and he would tell her about this phone call with Cullen, and it really didn't add any clarity to the situation. And so Jen and her family decide the best thing they can do is go to the boat ramp where Cullen had said he wanted to be picked up, in hopes that maybe he would make his way there and they would find him. So Jennifer and her family head out to this location, and Cullen's not there. They get out, they're yelling for him. There's no sign of him, and shortly after, a police car would show up because this was one of the areas where Jennifer had said when she spoke to police that Cullen might be. And so the police officer gets out, they take an official statement from Jennifer, and at this point they file an official missing person report. Before the police began looking for Cullen, they reached out to his wireless service provider and they asked them to ping his cell phone from the tower. Any service provider has the ability to roughly triangulate the location of a cell phone based on the last few locations of the phone. The last 4 locations that the service provider pinged for Cullen were up to 4 miles apart from each other, which was bizarre in its own way, because the idea that in a very rugged, rough area in a very short amount of time, that Cullen had been moving 4, 5, 6, 7 miles just to get to these different points, that didn't really make sense. But also when they looked at these points on a map, it looked like each of them was either near a paved road, or in order to get to them, you would have had to cross a paved road. And so they're thinking to themselves, why does he keep moving point to point if at any one of these locations he's near relative safety? But as strange as these 4 locations were, the police now had a really solid starting point. So they dispatched people to each of these points, and they began combing along the river where he had last been seen. And within an hour, they discovered his boat. It was a little ways down from where he had been dropped off. It was missing an oar, and it was basically beached on the side of the river. It wasn't clear if it had been intentionally beached, but Cullen wasn't in it, and when they searched around the area, they couldn't find any sign that Cullen was in the area. They were yelling for him. He wasn't yelling back. Interestingly, a man who owned property near where the pontoon boat was found reported to police hearing screaming or yelling coming from the area where the boat was found around the same time that Cullen went missing. But despite this piece of information, it didn't actually help them discover where Cullen actually went. For the next 48 hours, police and hundreds of people searched in the areas where his cell phone had pinged and along the river where his pontoon had been found, but there was no sign of him. Then, on the evening of May 28th, approximately 48 hours after Cullen had gone missing, they discovered his body. It was located less than a half mile away from a paved road, and it was situated in between those 4 points that the cell phone provider had given. He was laying completely face down with his right arm under his body and his left arm over his head, clutching some grass. When they rolled him over, he had some blood coming out of his nose, but besides that, there was no significant trauma anywhere on his body. Cullen appeared to be wearing all of his clothes. However, it was noted that the strap on his waders was really badly twisted. Now, if he had never taken his clothes off, that would have been something he would have fixed. It would have been very uncomfortable when he started this trip to go fishing. That would have been something he would have fixed. Now, he said to his wife on the phone that he was going to be taking his clothes off, which there was no explanation for that, but he clearly said that to his wife, and she reported that to police. And so some have speculated that between that phone call and finding him with the twisted strap on his waders, that indicates that perhaps his clothes did come off at some point over the past couple of days and were put back on again, either by him or by someone else. His cell phone had also been found in his front pocket, indicating that those cell phone pings had been his actual location. Initially, Cullen's autopsy was completely inconclusive. There was no trauma to his body. There was no obvious thing that killed him. But later on, it was determined he died of pneumonia caused by inhaling his own vomit. So we don't know how you get to a place where you're inhaling your own vomit, but I would imagine you're in a pretty panicked state of mind if that could happen to you. Many people believe Cullen's death was the result of a traumatic brain injury caused by all the years of playing football and getting hit in the head. And so that can lead to paranoia. And so perhaps this was a fit of paranoia. He got turned around, he got scared, he thought somebody was chasing him. And then, he vomits and inhales his vomit, and that ultimately kills him. And in 2011, Cullen had briefly shown signs of being a little bit paranoid when one day he thought someone was following him, and he actually went to a family member's house and said, "I think someone's following me," but he could never identify where this person was or who they were. But even if this was a fit of paranoia and no one was following him in the woods, well, why didn't he stop on the paved road every time he crossed it? Because that would have represented safety. I mean, in 2011, when he supposedly had another fit of paranoia, his instincts were to go to a family member and to seek help. And so you would think his instincts in this situation would be similar. He would seek help, he would seek safety, but he continuously left safety. He left the road. He left his boat. His boat was safety. Why did he leave his boat? And even if we turn this around and we say, no, it was not a fit of paranoia, that he was in fact being followed by someone or something in the woods, well then why would that prompt him to call his wife and say, I'm going to get out of the boat and take my clothes off, and then proceed to walk 4, 5, 6, 7 miles in a very short period of time, crossing over a paved road at least 1 or 2 times and not stopping, not signaling for help? That doesn't make sense either. And what was that screaming that resident heard coming from the area where the pontoon boat was found? Unfortunately, there are many questions in this case, and the vast majority of them will go unanswered. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments what it is and where you found it. So give us the timestamp, and the first one to do that will pin you at the top of the comment section. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, please give the like button a gift card to their favorite restaurant, but don't put any money on it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's JohnBallen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is MrBallen. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.